From Washington, D.C., this is the Muslim News. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Hena Zuberi. Gun violence marked 4th of July celebrations across the country this past weekend. At least 150 people were fatally shot in more than 400 shootings. Chicago Police Superintendent David Brown called it the most challenging weekend of the year. In his city alone, 20 people were shot and 6 were killed. The violence started Friday night and continued into Sunday. Data gathered by the Gun Violence Archive revealed that there have been over 22,000 deaths from gun violence in the United States in 2021 so far. This includes almost 700 children under the age of 11. President Joe Biden's goal of getting half the country vaccinated by the 4th of July has not been reached. The lag in vaccinations is taking place as the Indian Delta variant takes a foothold in areas where vaccination rates are low. But a bright spot amidst this news is Vermont. Known for Senator Bernie Sanders and maple syrup, Vermont has now a new claim to fame. At 80%, the state boasts the country's highest vaccination rate.
We're delighted this happened. I mean, it makes us probably the safest place in the country and maybe the world. And that's amazing testimony to the hard work of people living in Vermont.
I was kind of hesitant on the fence on it, and then it was just like, hey, ease of convenience, might as well. Everyone else I know and love is doing it, so definitely jump on the board there.
Meanwhile, GOP governors implore residents to overcome vaccine hesitancy as the Delta variant spreads. Socialists are listed alongside terrorists in a United States Navy counterterrorism training document. According to The Intercept, the training manual asks the question, anarchists, socialists, and neo-Nazis represent which terrorist ideological category? The document is used to train Navy military police personnel. It's used by the Naval Education Training Center. A new exhibition at the University of Michigan's Stamp Gallery explores the diversity of Muslim communities in Detroit and Southeast Michigan. Halal Metropolis is on view until July 17th. It was created and curated by artist and associate professor Usman Khan and photographer Razi Jaffrey, both affiliated with the Stamps Gallery. History professor Sally Howell, who is the director of the Center of Arab American Studies at the university, is also part of the team. The three say that Halal Metropolis alludes to the established and growing Muslim population in the Detroit metro area. It's one of the largest and most diverse Muslim populations in the United States. The exhibit seeks to bridge the gap between the vibrant Muslim community and its place in the narrative of the larger community. It does so using photographs, oral histories, and artifacts. Most people in the world's poorest countries will need to wait 2 more years before they're vaccinated against COVID-19. This is despite recent pledges by rich nations to increase support of the COVID-19 Vaccine Global Access Initiative, or COVAX. Commitments by the United States and the European Union will be hindered by restrictions on vaccine exports. The African Union has secured 400 million doses of Johnson & Johnson vaccine. This may be too late for many across the continent as it grapples with its third largest surge of COVID since June. The United States imposed new sanctions on Burma last Friday. The target of the latest move were 22 Burmese individuals, including 4 of Burma's government ministers. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that the latest sanctions were in response to the Burmese military's ongoing campaign of violence. Since its military coup on February 1st, the government has killed and detained thousands of pro-democracy activists. The United Nations says that the Burmese military has killed over 800 unarmed people. This includes at least 40 who are believed to have died in police custody. The UN has also found that over 5,000 Burmese pro-democracy activists are in detention. The Burmese military government is already under trial at the International Court of Justice for the genocide of Rohingya Muslims. America's withdrawal from Afghanistan continues to be marked by confusion and fear. General Mir Asadullah Kohistani is the new commander of the Bagram Air Base, 30 miles from the capital city of Kabul. He said he only learned of the American forces' exit after they had left, since they did not inform the Afghans. US soldiers quietly left the base last week, effectively completing their withdrawal from Afghanistan. Bagram Air Base served as the linchpin for US-led operations in the 20-year war on Afghanistan. However, 1,000 American troops could remain on the ground in the country. Taliban spokesman Suhail Shaheen said this week that this would be a violation of the Doha Agreement between the Taliban and the United States. Under it, the United States agreed that no foreign forces, including military contractors, will remain in Afghanistan. Meanwhile, more than 1,500 Afghan forces have fled to Tajikistan as the Taliban continue to gain ground. Forbes has reported that more than 700 American military vehicles have been captured by the Taliban. In a major victory for Palestinians, Israel has failed to extend its controversial citizenship law. If passed, the legislation would have continued to deny Palestinians who marry Israeli citizens residency and citizenship rights. Human Rights Watch pointed to the law as an example of apartheid. Israel's Palestinian minority makes up 20% of the population. They have familial ties to Palestinians in the occupied West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Palestinian citizens view the law as one of the several forms of discrimination they face in a country that legally defines itself as a Jewish nation-state. Critics say that the law is a racist measure aimed to restricting the growth of Israel's Palestinian minority. Supporters say it is needed to preserve Israel's Jewish character. According to the law, Palestinian citizens of Israel have few, if any, avenues for bringing spouses from the occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip into Israel. The law does not apply to nearly 500,000 Jewish settlers who have lived in the occupied West Bank who possess full Israeli citizenship. Gunmen kidnapped 140 students from a boarding school in northwestern Nigeria on Monday. The attackers opened fire and overpowered security guards after storming the Bethel Baptist High School in Kaduna State. They abducted most of the 165 students who were boarding there overnight. Parents and residents waited for news of the missing children outside of the school. Close to 1,000 students and pupils have been abducted in Nigeria since December. It's the latest in a wave of mass abductions targeting school children. Most students have been released after negotiations with local officials, although some are still being held. Heavily armed criminal gangs in northwest and central Nigeria often attack villages to loot, steal cattle, and abduct for ransom. Often, gangs target rural schools and colleges where students stay in dormitories and security is light. This allows for the easy transportation of a large number of victims to forest hideouts to negotiate ransoms. Vatican News reports that 84-year-old Father Stan Swamy, an Indian Jesuit priest and rights activist, had died in Indian government custody. He was jailed under the country's controversial anti-terrorism law for his activism. Father Stan Swamy was best known for his work championing the rights of indigenous and marginalized people in eastern India's Jharkhand state. He was one of the 16 Bhima Karigan political prisoners, which included scholars, lawyers, academics, and poets. Digital forensic scientists have found at least 2 computers were hacked and evidence was planted in that case. In science news, the Amal mission of the United Arab Emirates is sending impressive images from Mars. Photos from the orbiter are the most detailed yet of the planet's discrete auroras. They also show ultraviolet emissions that follow the patterns of a decaying magnetic field. Amal is formally known as the Emirates Mars mission. It arrived on Mars in February and started its official science run on May 23rd. The primary goals of the $200 million mission focused on the planet's atmosphere. Computer engineer Sara Al-Amiri is the lead scientist for the project. The UAE hired old hands from NASA's missions, mainly at the University of Colorado in Boulder, to manufacture and mentor their scientists for the project. The small Arab nation built the Mars mission from scratch in 6 years. Coffee has a story. It's difficult to believe that coffee was considered harmful by the World Health Organization. Now, coffee is found to have reduced the risk of many ailments. More details in this report by Ali Khalaf and Saleha Farouk.
About 2.25 billion cups of it are consumed daily worldwide. This tiny black seed is gaining new respect. It is coffee. It originated in Africa, but it was the Arabs of Yemen who first extracted the beans. They learned to roast it, grind it, and mix it with hot water. This goes back to the 15th century. Since Muslims don't drink alcohol, it is believed that they went for coffee instead. According to some historians, it all began with the goats. An imam named Khaldi noticed that his goats eating coffee beans were displaying hyperactivity. He then tried it himself and observed that it allowed him to stay up all night praying. It became a popular drink in Arabia, which named it qahwa. Turks started using qahwa as well. Within 100 years of the 16th century, it arrived in Europe. They pronounced qahwa as coffee. But a bit of suspicion lingered. Ethiopian Orthodox Christians prohibited coffee, regarding it as a Muslim drink, up until as late as 1889. Some French doctors condemned coffee as poisonous. A British king banned coffee houses. More recently, coffee was on the list of the World Health Organization's reasons for possible carcinogens from 1991 to 2016. California, as recently as 2018, required coffee to be labeled with a cancer warning. A recent study now says that drinking coffee actually has many health benefits. It leads to a reduced risk of dying from chronic liver disease. The research is from the universities of Southampton and Edinburgh. The research, published in the journal BMJ Open, examined the data from more than 26 observational studies. The research involved more than 2.25 million participants. Harvard also reported evidence that coffee can help prevent type 2 diabetes, some cancers, Alzheimer's, and even gallstones. Coffee is even being linked to a reduction in suicidal thoughts. However, the British National Health System advises to avoid coffee in order to reduce anxiety. It seems the good old qahwa has many good days ahead of it.
Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment. So stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
Welcome back. A heat wave that smashed all-time high temperature records in Western Canada and the US Northwest has left a rising death toll in its wake as officials brace for more sizzling weather and the threat of wildfires. To discuss this in detail, let's go to Saliha Farouk. Over to you, Saliha.
Much appreciated. Today, we're very happy to be joined by Richard Rood, who is a professor of climate and space sciences and engineering at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. Professor Richard, in light of recent climate events, thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome, and thank you for asking me.
Our pleasure. Now, in Canada's Pacific Northwest, approximately 180 wildfires have emerged because of the heat wave and lightning strikes affecting all of North America. And unfortunately, hundreds of people have died as a result. How is the changing climate, specifically the warming climate, making these heat waves more frequent and intense?
Well, the planet is warming. And as the planet warms, we expect there to be more heat, especially in the lower to middle latitudes. And as we get into summer and that heat comes up to the northern latitudes, we expect to see record heat. And since the planet is warming, it is just a natural outcome that there will be more intense heat and there will be higher temperatures. Things like fire follow from that because with that, when it is dry, and it tends to be dry in these high pressure systems in the summer in this part of the continent, the ignition, the fuel, and the tendency to have very large fires becomes more likely.
Please talk to us a little bit about the seismic effects of the heat wave. So, for example, not only has the recent heat wave been linked to human deaths, but there have also been ecological consequences as a result, and they have been numerous. So, for example, seashore animals have seen mass deaths on their end.
Yes, I mean, the life on this planet is adapted to certain say ranges of temperature and certain ranges of moisture. And when you have an event like this, it stresses everything because it's moving it outside of its envelope of adaptation, of its, really survivability in many cases. Heat waves are, depending on how you do the counting, the heat waves are the largest cause of human death in terms of environmental stresses. And then when we look at an event like this, one of the amazing things to me has been how much this heat caused melting of snow that was up in the Cascades and up in the Rockies, and how much this heat even caused the melting of glaciers, which causes this burst of water and mud. And there are ecological impacts all over that come from heat of this extreme. The extremity of this heat, how far it is from normal, is really just quite astounding. It's one of the few times I would say I've been sort of taken aback by a major sort of burst of very high temperatures.
Thank you for that insight. Now, experts such as yourself are estimating that these heat waves will likely happen far more frequently and with greater severity in the future because of things like climate change. How will this affect our ability to sustain the environment, as you mentioned, as well as animal populations directly impacted by the heat?
Well, when you start looking at the ecological systems and you're looking at, say, forests, one of the things that you'll have with forests, there will be die-offs. There'll be die-offs because of fire. There'll be die-offs because of drought and water stress. And when those forests start to recover, the trees that have historically been in that area will not be able to grow as robustly, so you will probably see things like invasive species. Of course, related to this, you will also see the problems associated with the animals and the other parts of the ecosystem. And I think one of the things that people need to start thinking about is that our ideas of conservation, our ideas of preservation of species is going to have to change quite a bit. We're not going to be in a position where we can say, well, here's been a fire, here's been a disruption, let's replant to try to recover what we used to have. We're going to have to actually be thinking about what is the ecosystem that we might want to see evolve, because otherwise we will see it taken over by opportunistic plants and opportunistic animals.
We know that there have been global response mechanisms such as the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which has, of course, dedicated an entire goal to climate action, and not to mention the 2015 Paris Agreement. Do you believe that global governance and global nations are being responsible in meeting their commitments to reducing greenhouse gas emissions? And would you say that that would be the solution at this time?
I do not feel as if we are in a position that we can rely simply on mitigation, reduction of carbon dioxide emissions to get us, let's say, out of this situation. Part of it is even the countries that are trying to act on this and trying to act responsibly are facing a problem of monumental political and logistical challenges. They're facing the problems that they are wanting to also see economic growth. And right now, that relies very strongly upon energy use, and energy use still relies very strongly upon fossil fuels. So I do not think that we can count on a reduction strategy in order to get us out of this. One of the things that I have been trying to advocate is that there be more attention to adaptation, because in any event, the climate is going to continue to warm for decades. Presently, as long as our emissions stay where they are, it's going to be accelerating in that warming for the coming decades. And this is going to have huge impacts, as we've already seen, on ecosystems and human health. But it's also going to change the geography, honestly, because there's going to be the coastal sea level rise, and it's going to have more extreme droughts like we're seeing in the western part of the U.S. And these things are going to be causing migration. You know, if you look at some of the issues in the Middle East and with Syria over the last few years, there are a lot of people who talk about the contribution that drought and sustained drought has made to instability in that region. So we're already seeing both drought and coastal migration, which I think is going to be a major challenge for governments and regions.
You touched upon this a little bit, but do you think that these recent extreme weather events would be sufficient in helping everyone take climate change seriously, as well as recommendations such as yours? And for those of us who are concerned, what are some calls to action that you recommend that everyone can take in their daily lives?
So it is my hope, and I would say I have some anecdotal evidence from my students, that when you start to focus on adaptation, you start to focus on the real scale of the problems that we are going to have to address in those adaptations, including the huge impacts on our built environment, that it does get people to start paying more attention to the mitigation problem in order to limit the amount of warming that we'll see, and of course the consequences that come from that warming. So it is, I think, part of a strategy that, a subset of people who will take the adaptation problem seriously and will then be more motivated to, let's say, limit the damage associated with it, and that will be an important thing to do. For me, one of the most important things that individuals can do is to start to think individually how they will adapt, and start to become politically and socially engaged with their communities, with their companies, in order to develop a more systematic approach to this.
Discussing climate change with Professor Richard Rood, who is a professor of climate and space sciences and engineering at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. Professor Richard, thank you again for your time today.
You're welcome. And again, thank you for asking me.
Back to Hena Zuberi in the news studio.
Thank you, Saleha and Mr. Rood. It's been really hot here in the nation's capital too. Stay safe, you all. Before moving on to our next analysis, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back after these messages.
Our fellow Americans.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans.
And soon, they will be available to everyone.
The science is clear. These vaccines will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
They could save your life.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
That's the first step to ending the pandemic and moving our country forward. It's up to you.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. Former President Donald Trump held his second Save America rally in Florida last Saturday, the first being held in Ohio last month. Dr. Rachel Bloom is joining Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid for a detailed conversation to discuss the impact of these rallies and Trump's new slogan. Over to you, Imam Mujahid.
Thank you, Hena. America is divided, and you heard it all the time. How much divided is it? Well, to the level that even the vaccine, Democrats are getting more of it, and Republicans are not quite sure they want to take it. This division is going to take a long time to heal, but is it going to heal? We have someone who's expert of the divisions in American politics, Dr. Rachel Bloom. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Thank you for having me.
Rachel Bloom is assistant professor of American politics at the University of Oklahoma. So tell me this, Professor Bloom, that what do you see? I mean, now slogans are becoming a little more direct. It was, make America great, and now it is being interpreted as Save America. So what is going on now? I mean, what type of research has gone behind changing slogan to Save America?
I'm not sure about the research, but it is a little bit ironic, isn't it? We spent 4 years being told Donald Trump would make America great again, as if it wasn't. But then somehow that wasn't enough, and now he needs to save America after only 6 months of a new president. So it seems like more of Donald Trump's classic fear-mongering, blame tossing, and publicity gathering. This is as if he is running a campaign for office very soon. Those style of rallies are what he is now holding, saying it's about saving America. and he's holding them in specific areas only, states like Ohio or Florida, where he won, but maybe not as much as he wanted to win. In states that, and I think this is really important, have big seats up for grabs in the 2022 elections. So Ohio has a whole Senate seat up for grabs. If they lost that to the Democrats, that could tilt the balance in the Senate even more towards that party. So some might think that Trump's rallies could serve a dual purpose as well. Trump hasn't admitted this, but that is my analysis on it.
Do you think that slogan "Make America Great Again" was already translating in some people's minds, saving America from the diversity which it is moving forward?
Absolutely, yes. And I think we've had people like this throughout history and all civilizations, but in the United States, we haven't elected a president who's been so overtly anti-difference. We've had candidates like George Wallace in the 60s and 70s, who was the infamous governor of Alabama who cracked down in really brutal ways on civil rights protests when Martin Luther King Jr. was leading those in the South. Trump is a lot like Wallace, but Trump got elected. So it tells you a little bit about at least some of the country's fear about their place in the world, their place in America, their future, what the American dream means to them, and their willingness to blame someone else, anyone who doesn't look like them, for whatever Trump supporters feel like they're losing.
You have written on Tea Party insurgency inside the GOP. But don't you think that the whatever GOP was when Tea Party was born, they were insurgent, but now they are the main, something like that is the main party, and those who are somewhat the historic GOP is actually a fringe group?
Yes, exactly. And that is something I talk about in my book, because when we have an insurgent faction like that, they eventually disappear, right? The Tea Party isn't holding rallies anymore. They don't have to. Donald Trump is holding them for them. And in the case of the Tea Party, they disappeared because they became the Republican elite. So whether or not the Republican establishment is used to it yet, Donald Trump is the titular leader of the party, and his followers are the party insiders now. So the Republican Party of the Tea Party is the Republican Party of Trump, and that is still the main flavor in the Republican Party today.
So what element of the Tea Party are lost during this process, or are all elements are incorporated in one way or the other?
There were a lot of different people involved in the Tea Party at different stages. The one element that seems to be missing now, which, the writing was on the wall for a long time, was the economic libertarian element. The Koch brothers and other well-connected libertarian organizations helped fund and set up rallies for and set up meetings for Tea Partiers in the early days, 2009, a little bit of 2010. But as soon as disaffected Republicans started meeting and participating in elections, it became really clear that they didn't really care about economics. They cared about what we now call cultural issues, immigration, xenophobia, just anything that would keep people like them. So we're thinking like white, middle class, Christian Americans, anything that would keep people like them in power. That's what they really cared about. And it turned out not to be economic libertarianism. So that element of the Tea Party that got so much press early on is completely absent from the Tea Party or the Republican Party of Donald Trump, right? That's the party that spends untold amounts of money building the wall the border wall with Mexico that never really finished or mattered, just for show, which is not really the picture of fiscal responsibility.
So where do you think the Koch brothers and these people gonna go?
Well, those networks have a couple things has happened to them. Some people in the libertarian networks have just thrown in their lot with the Republican Party wholesale. So Freedom Works, one of the libertarian Tea Party organizations out of DC, went more Tea Party, and the libertarians who used to be at the top in that organization left, started other groups. The Koch brothers are aging, and I think they found that they can get a lot more done through state legislatures. So we have an organization in the United States called ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. And essentially, it writes model legislation that benefits certain companies. And this is the kind of legislation that has made all kinds of firearms available because it benefits companies who make and sell firearms. The model legislation produced by ALEC is coming from those libertarians and their apparatus. So they've turned their attention now where they can make a difference without attracting a whole lot of attention.
So they're more focused on the state level agenda and don't get into the politics of the federal level.
Not anymore. And there are a lot of issues still that you can control at the state level here. Education, firearm legislation, laws, regulations, insurance, medical insurance, a lot of big industries that don't like being regulated are controlled at the state level.
Professor Balloon, is it just is still the political divide, division at national level, or is it penetrating into the churches and to the families?
Oh, it's already there. It's already been in the churches for some time. As an example, in the 1960s, knowing that someone in America went to church, any kind of church, but especially Protestant, didn't tell you anything about their politics. But now, if somebody is a mainline, or not a mainline, an evangelical Protestant, in a lot of cases a Catholic, you know that they are a Republican. And you know that these things are reinforcing because the churches have made some issues that were never explicit in biblical teachings, like abortion, same-sex marriage. They've made those very political issues the forefront of religion as well. So since at least the 1980s, religion and the Republican Party have been kind of mutually reinforcing. And at this point, most of the evangelicals who we thought wouldn't like someone like Trump, someone who was, had been married a lot of times, was unfaithful and proud of it, just didn't stand for traditional morality. The churches stood behind him, and they still do, which shows you a little bit of how partisan religion has become in this country.
It is also reaching to very, personal type of decisions between the red and blue state, but also 86% of Democrats, Professor Bloom, has taken vaccine, at least one shot. And 45% of Republicans say they have no plan to take any of that. So
yes.
So this, is it because of politics, or they're watching different TV?
Yes, I mean, that's our best guess. At first, we were calling this vaccine hesitancy because it wasn't clear if people weren't getting the vaccine because they just wanted to see how it worked for their friends, or they didn't want to go to all the effort of trying to sign up for one of these early vaccination sites. But we hoped they would get the vaccine once it was available at their local Walgreens or doctor's office. And they haven't. So in states like Oklahoma, where I live, a very Republican state, I believe our vaccine levels are under 50% because people are just refusing to take advantage of it. And from what I've heard, anecdotally, just talking to people who aren't taking the vaccine, most of it is because the information they're receiving from Fox News, from some of the more extreme alt-right outlets they read or watch or listen to online, they're hearing that the vaccine's not safe, that it could be some way to implant a chip in their body so the government can track them, that it will have terrible effects down the road, that it's just a scheme by Joe Biden to hurt them. Just anything you could imagine that someone who's already on edge, already paranoid about someone being out to get them, anything you can imagine being told is what those people are being told. And it's resulted in this really weird discrepancy where we're a country that has more mass vaccine availability than almost any other country, yet half of our citizens refuse to take advantage of it.
I mean, in vaccine also, red states have lower level and blue states have higher level, just like individual, except with the exception of Georgia, which is a purple state. So I don't know how it made a difference. And the bills which are being passed and on different issues, I mean, it seems to be a full-fledged fight between, it's not just the red state and the blue state, red people and blue people, and there seems to be a big fight at all levels. And at the same time, a whole lot of guns are being purchased, the record number of guns being purchased. So where are we heading?
It seems like we could experience more of the violence we experienced on January 6th. I certainly hope not. You know, we could hope that all these people are just purchasing firearms because they have fun doing target practice. But I mean, if we're honest, why would we need to arm ourselves so heavily if we didn't plan on using our firearms? So that's something that's concerned a lot of people for a long time, and it seems like this politically untouchable issue. And that's, yeah, I don't think a lot of people know how to resolve that. I know Joe Biden has received criticism for not doing more about guns, but there's only so much you can do about guns if you don't have cooperation from the Senate. And then the voting rights laws that are being passed right now, to me, that's as concerning or more concerning than the gun sales, because you have individual states doing everything they can to figure out where Democratic constituents were voting, and Democratic constituents are often Black and brown. They're often lower income. They often have less access to transportation. So what states like Arizona and Georgia are doing is limiting the access to ballot places. So maybe shutting down polling places in those areas, taking away types of early voting, making it illegal for someone else to drop off your ballot. Say you're an elderly person and you need someone else to drive your ballot to a poll. In Arizona, that's now illegal. All of these things are thinly veiled ways to restrict voting. And it's even worse because of the Supreme Court, right? They've now sent down a second decision gutting the Civil Rights Act, or the Voting Rights Act, which is what had guaranteed oversight on these types of issues. So we no longer have a federal safeguard, and the states, especially the states that we thought were red and went blue, like Georgia and Arizona, their Republican legislatures are very eager to avoid this happening again. And some state level politicians are trying to make a career on being the biggest supporters of Donald Trump. So it's a bad situation.
So, Professor Bloom, has it been this bad or this divided in our history before?
You could think the late 1960s with the civil rights demonstrations, The summer of 68 saw race riots comparable to the summer of 2020.
Wasn't that consistently on the improving side of it? I mean, it was taking the country towards a consensus, towards more civil rights and all those things. Direction seems to be different this time.
Well, if you think of the protests last summer, I do think they led us not to a consensus, but to an awareness that police brutality was on the radar. That every time a Black person was killed by a cop, it would go on the news. And that is similar to what happened with civil rights. The civil rights sit-ins, the movement, the riots, none of that changed the hearts and minds of hardcore racists in the South. It did elevate national attention. It got the attention of a lot of college students and Northern liberals. But what it really seemed to do is to redivide the parties. So it set up a Republican Party that was pretty much anyone who used to be a Democrat in the South and was white. So the party of race issues instead of the party of Lincoln. And in sweeping all these issues under the rug, it didn't resolve anything. I mean, there were still people in Selma, in Alabama, in Georgia, did not think that Black people deserved the right to vote, that they were equal citizens, but they had to give it to them. And now here we are, not so long down the road, and the same issues are cropping up again. Because I think the real answer to have we been this divided before is, yes, during the Civil War. And that's what all of this is coming from. Our country's refusal to reckon with its past of enslavement and persecution of ethnic minorities. And because we won't grapple with that, it continues to crop up every 50 years or so. And if you look at the timeline since the Civil War, we see uprisings of the Ku Klux Klan, right, at these regular intervals. And now what we have maybe isn't the Klan, but it might as well be. We have a lot of white nationalist gangs, for lack of a better word, in a lot of the country, the Proud Boys, the groups that organized the Capitol riots. They are essentially the modern day Klan.
So, Professor, are there some scholars who are dwelling upon the possibility of civil war?
Maybe not in the way we saw it in 1864. We don't have bayonets anymore, or at least not widely in circulation. So the weapons might look different. The battlegrounds might look different. But in terms of hearts and minds, in terms of citizens interacting with one another, I think we are in a kind of war. People for whom being a Republican, a Donald Trump supporter, is their identity, are just not going to interact with people who think anything else. So we're at this kind of stalemate, and it brims over into violence here and there, into some isolated incidences, into the Capitol riots. It's going to look a little different, but we're as close as we have been to a really divided country along, I would say, race since the 1860s.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Rachel Bloom. Thank you so much, Professor at the University of Oklahoma in politics. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Back to you, Hena.
Thank you so much, Imam Mujahid. That's all from our Washington studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube and Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.